The Whitmore financial holiday party was in full swing when Daniel Reed noticed her. Not the woman, though he would notice her soon enough, but the little girl sitting alone at a corner table, her legs swinging beneath her chair,
Look
her
what I
eyes fixed on
found.
the chaos
What is it,
of
sweetie?
adults laughing
It's a
and
Christmas
clinking glasses
secret.
around her.
That's wonderful,
She
darling.
looked about 7 or 8 with honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat braid and a green velvet dress that suggested someone had taken great care with her appearance. But what struck Daniel was the stillness in her face. Not sadness exactly, something more like resignation. He watched as a waiter passed by and the girl didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't react at all to the crash of a dropped tray nearby. Daniel set his champagne glass down on the nearest table. He had spent the better part of the evening hovering near the bar, nursing the same drink for an hour, trying to calculate the exact moment when he could leave without seeming rude. The party was loud, bright, filled with people who knew how to work a room in ways Daniel had never mastered. He had only come because the alternative was another Friday night alone in his apartment reheating leftover Chinese food and pretending the silence didn't press against him like something physical. But now, watching this child sit motionless while the world roared around her, Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Without thinking, he crossed the ballroom. The girl didn't notice his approach until he was directly in front of her, crouching down to bring himself to her eye level. Only then did she look up, her gray eyes meeting his with a caution that seemed too old for her face. Daniel lifted his hands and signed a simple greeting. "Hello, my name is Daniel." The transformation in the girl's face was instantaneous. Her eyes went wide, then bright, and then slowly, like sunrise breaking over water, she smiled. It was the kind of smile that rewrote everything that made the whole ballroom fade into background noise. Her hands moved in careful, precise signs. AVA. Then, with a glance toward someone Daniel couldn't yet see, she added something that made his throat tight. "Most people don't know how to talk to me." Daniel signed back, keeping his movements slow and clear. "Well, I think we should change that, don't you?" From across the ballroom, Sophia Grant watched a stranger make her daughter smile for the first time all evening. She set down her champagne glass with more force than she intended, the crystal chiming against the table, and began walking toward them. Daniel became aware of her approach, the way you become aware of a storm front moving in. A shift in the air, a change in temperature. He stood turning and found himself looking up at a woman who belonged on magazine covers. Tall, with dark hair swept back from a face that managed to be both striking and severe, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent. But it was her eyes that held him. The same gray as the little girl's, the same watchfulness, the same careful assessment. "You know sign language?" It wasn't a question. Her voice had the kind of authority that came from years of being listened to without having to raise it. Daniel straightened, suddenly aware of how rumpled his suit was compared to her elegance, how out of place he must look next to this polished woman in her designer gown. "My son is hard of hearing. I learned when he was 3. Something in the woman's face shifted, not softening exactly, but cracking like ice beginning to thaw. "I'm Sophia Grant. This is my daughter Ava." The name clicked into place. Sophia Grant, COO of Whitmore Financial, the woman whose signature appeared on company-wide emails, whose decisions rippled through departments like seismic events. Daniel had never been in the same room with her before. Tonight had never imagined a scenario where he would be. "Daniel Reed. I'm an analyst in the derivatives division." Sophia's expression didn't change, but something in her posture relaxed fractionally. She looked down at Ava, then back at Daniel, and for just a moment he saw past the armor she wore so visibly. Saw the exhaustion underneath the worry, the quiet desperation of a mother who couldn't bridge the gap between herself and her child. Daniel turned back to Ava and signed again. "My son's name is Ethan. He's 9. Do you like Christmas?" Ava's hands flew in response. "Yes, but parties are boring when nobody talks to me." "What do you like to do?" "I like to draw, and read, and play games with kids who know sign language, but there aren't very many." Daniel translated for Sophia, who was watching the exchange with the focused intensity of someone trying to memorize a foreign language. When he finished, Sophia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you," she said, and there was something raw in those 2 words that made Daniel look at her more closely. The party continued around them, but somehow the three of them had created a bubble of quiet in the chaos. Ava tugged on Sophia's hand, signing something Daniel caught only fragments of, and Sophia's face did something complicated. A flash of frustration, then determination, then a kind of helpless longing that Daniel recognized all too well. He had worn that expression himself in the early days after Ethan's diagnosis. The desperate wanting to understand, to connect, to break through the barrier that separated him from his son. The fear that he would fail, that the distance would become permanent. "Would you like to sit with us?" The words were out before Daniel could think them through, before he could catalog all the reasons this was inappropriate. She was his boss's boss's boss. He was nobody, a mid-level analyst who processed numbers and attended meetings where he rarely spoke. Sophia hesitated. Daniel could see her calculating, weighing professional boundaries against the simple fact of her daughter's happiness. Then Ava tugged on her hand again, and Sophia's resistance crumbled. Just for a few minutes. They found a table near the edge of the ballroom, away from the worst of the noise. Ava claimed the chair next to Daniel with the single-minded determination of a child who had found someone who spoke her language. She peppered him with questions, her hands moving in quick, fluid signs that he answered with the patient clarity he had learned from years with Ethan. "What does your son like to do? Does he go to a special school? Can he hear anything at all? Do you have a dog? What's your favorite color? Do you like chocolate or vanilla ice cream better?" Daniel answered each question carefully, occasionally translating for Sophia when Ava's signs came too fast for her mother to follow. He noticed how Sophia leaned forward each time he interpreted, how her fingers moved slightly, as if trying to memorize the shapes. She was trying so hard. That was what struck him most. Not her beauty, not her position, not the obvious wealth that surrounded her like a second skin. It was the effort she poured into every interaction with her daughter. The way she refused to look away even when Ava's signs made no sense to her. The way she kept trying to respond in her broken, halting ASL, stumbling over grammar and hand shapes, but never giving up. She wasn't cold at all, Daniel realized. She was terrified. Terrified of failing this small person who depended on her, terrified of the gap between them that she couldn't seem to close no matter how hard she tried. Halfway through dinner, Sophia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and Daniel saw her expression shift into something harder, more remote, the armor sliding back into place. "I'm sorry I have to take this. Work." She stood smoothing her dress with hands that moved just a fraction too quickly. "Always work." She walked away, phone already pressed to her ear, and Daniel watched her go. Watched the way her shoulders squared as she moved, the way she seemed to grow taller, more imposing as she stepped back into her professional role. Ava waited until her mother was out of earshot, then turned to Daniel with a suddenly serious expression. "She thinks I don't know she's sad. But I can see it. She's sad because she can't talk to me like you can." Daniel's hands stilled. He barely knew this child, barely knew her mother. But there was something in Ava's eyes, a wisdom beyond her years, the kind that came from watching the world from outside it, that made him want to answer honestly. "I think your mother loves you very much. And sometimes love is hard to show when you don't have the right words." Ava considered this, her small face grave. "Can you teach her?" The question landed in Daniel's chest like a stone. Teach Sophia. The idea was presumptuous, impossible. She was the COO of a Fortune 500 company. He was an analyst who lived in a cramped apartment in Queens and worried about making rent if Ethan's medical bills ran high. What possible business did he have inserting himself into her life? But before he could formulate a response, Sophia returned. She looked slightly disheveled, a strand of hair escaping from its careful arrangement, and there was a tightness around her mouth that suggested the phone call had not gone well. She caught him looking and attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Crisis averted. For now." Daniel nodded, not sure what to say. But Ava was already signing again, her hands moving with the excited energy of a child who had made a decision. She was asking her mother something, and Sophia's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, uncertainty, hope. Sophia looked at Daniel. "Ava wants to know if you and your son would like to have coffee with us sometime." The words hung in the air between them. Daniel was aware of the weight of them, the implications. This wasn't just coffee. This was Sophia Grant, powerful and unreachable. opening a door he had never expected to see. This was Ava, 7 years old and desperately lonely, reaching for connection in the only way she knew how. And this was him, Daniel Reed, 35 years old, and so used to being invisible that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. "I think Ethan would like that very much," he heard himself say. Sophia's smile when it came was different from the polished ones she had worn earlier in the evening. Smaller, more genuine, touched with something that looked like relief. "I'll give you my number." They exchanged contact information with the slightly awkward efficiency of two people who weren't entirely sure what they were doing. Daniel's phone felt too cheap in his hand. The screen cracked from when Ethan had dropped it last month, and he was acutely conscious of Sophia's sleek device with its pristine case. But Ava was beaming, signing to her mother with an enthusiasm that needed no translation, and Sophia was actually laughing a real laugh that transformed her whole face and made her look younger, less guarded, more like the woman she might have been if life had been gentler with her. Later that evening, after the party had wound down and Ava had fallen asleep in the car, Sophia sat in her parked car in the underground garage of her building and stared at her phone. Daniel Reed's contact information glowed on the screen. Just a name and a number. Nothing extraordinary, but somehow it felt like more than that. She had felt more connected to Ava in those few hours than she had in months. Watching Daniel sign with her daughter, watching Ava's face light up with understanding, Sophia had felt something crack open in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. Her phone buzzed with a message. She didn't remember adding Daniel's number to her contacts, didn't remember setting it to notify her, but there it was. A simple text that made her heart rate pick up in a way that had nothing to do with work stress. "Let me know if you'd like Ethan and me to get coffee with you and Ava sometime." Sophia looked at her sleeping daughter in the rearview mirror. Ava's face was peaceful in sleep, the careful guardedness she wore during waking hours smoothed away. She looked like any other 7-year-old dreaming whatever children dream, untroubled by the distance that separated her from the world. Sophia typed back yes before she could talk herself out of it. Then she sat in her parked car for a long time, watching her daughter sleep, wondering what she had just set in motion, wondering if she was ready for it, knowing with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her that it was already too late to turn back. 3 days later, Daniel arrived at a small cafe near Central Park with Ethan in tow. His son had been nervous all morning, asking questions in rapid-fire sign language over breakfast, rearranging the puzzle pieces he had brought without actually connecting any of them. At 9 years old, Ethan was tall for his age, with Daniel's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, quiet and thoughtful in a way that had nothing to do with his hearing loss and everything to do with his personality. "Do you think she'll like me?" Ethan had signed that morning, his hands moving with the careful precision that Daniel recognized as barely contained anxiety. "She will." Daniel had promised, hoping he was right. Now, watching Ethan arrange puzzle pieces on the corner table they had claimed, Daniel wondered if he had made a mistake. This cafe was nicer than the places they usually went, with its exposed brick walls and artisanal coffee menu. The clientele looked expensive, casually wealthy, in a way that made Daniel's worn jacket feel shabby. But then the door opened and Sophia walked in with Ava, and Ethan looked up. For a moment the two children simply stared at each other, an assessment that happened faster than words could capture. Daniel saw something pass between them, a recognition that went deeper than shared experience. Two kids who knew what it meant to exist in a world that moved too fast for silence. Then Ethan set aside his puzzle and signed a greeting. Not the formal hello he had been taught in school, but something more casual, more real. Something that said, "I see you. I know what it's like." Ava's whole body relaxed in a way Daniel hadn't seen at the party. Within minutes, the two children had claimed the play area in the back of the cafe, their hands moving in animated conversation while the adults watched from nearby. They were comparing signs, Daniel realized after a moment. Ethan was showing Ava his version of certain words, and Ava was showing him hers, both of them giggling at the differences. It was the deaf equivalent of comparing accents, and watching them do, it felt like witnessing something sacred unfold. "I didn't expect that," Sophia admitted, her voice soft with surprise. She had chosen a seat that gave her a clear view of Ava, and Daniel noticed the way she tracked her daughter's movements, the way she leaned forward slightly whenever Ava signed something new. "It's different when you find someone who speaks your language," Daniel said. "Really speaks it." Sophia turned to look at him, and Daniel had the sudden sense that she was seeing past his rumpled sweater and unpolished shoes to something underneath. He found himself straightening in his chair, suddenly self-conscious in a way he hadn't been since he was a teenager. "How did you learn," she asked, "to sign so fluently, I mean?" "Fear." The word came out before Daniel could soften it, make it more palatable. "When Ethan was first diagnosed, I was terrified I wouldn't be able to communicate with my own son. So I studied like my life depended on it. Because in a way it did." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Ava. Then she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've tried. God, I've tried. But it just doesn't. My hands don't work that way. My brain doesn't think in signs." Daniel hesitated, then reached across the table to touch her hand, just briefly, just enough to make her look at him. "It's not about talent. It's about time. And it's about letting yourself make mistakes." Sophia's laugh was hollow. "I'm not very good at mistakes." "No," Daniel said gently. "I imagine you're not." The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm, a pattern that Daniel fell into without quite meaning to. Coffee dates became regular occurrences every Saturday morning without fail, then Wednesdays after school, then spontaneous meetups whenever their schedules aligned. Ava and Ethan became inseparable in the way of children who had found their people, developing their own private jokes and secret signs that neither parent could quite follow. And somewhere along the way, Daniel and Sophia became something more than acquaintances. Though he couldn't quite name what they were becoming, he noticed the small things first. The way Sophia's face relaxed when she walked into a room where Ava was signing with Ethan, the anxious watchfulness draining away to be replaced by something softer, almost peaceful. The way she started texting him questions about signs at odd hours, asking for clarification on grammar points that had confused her tutors for years. The way she laughed more now, a real laugh that transformed her whole face and made her look younger, less guarded, more like the woman she might have been if she hadn't spent so many years building walls around herself. He noticed how Ava bloomed. The silent, resigned girl from the Christmas party was gone, replaced by a child who chattered constantly and sign, who made jokes. Daniel had to explain to Sophia, who had started teaching her mother new words with the patient exasperation of a child who knew more than her parent. Teachers at Ava's school commented on the change. She was more engaged in class, more willing to participate where before she had hidden in the background. Even Sophia's mother, calling from Connecticut with increasing frequency, remarked on it during every conversation. But Daniel also noticed the harder things. The way Sophia flinched when work called, the guilt that flashed across her face when she had to cut a conversation short. The way she deflected questions about herself, turning the conversation back to the children, to work to anything but her own inner life. She was lonely, Daniel realized, possibly lonelier than he was, but she had built such careful walls around that loneliness that she barely seemed to know it was there. One evening, after the children had exhausted themselves at the park and were dozing on the grass nearby, Daniel and Sophia sat on a bench while the sun set over the city, painting everything golden rose. Sophia looked more relaxed than Daniel had ever seen her. Her perfect posture softened. One shoe slipped off her foot, her hair escaping from its usual severe arrangement. She was beautiful, he thought. Not just in the obvious ways, the magazine cover bone structure and designer clothes, but in the tired lines around her eyes, in the way she watched her daughter sleep, in the fierce tenderness she tried so hard to hide. "You're different with them," Sophia said suddenly. "With the kids. More open. More—" She searched for the word. "Yourself." Daniel blinked, surprised. "I guess I'm just more comfortable with kids. They're more honest." Sophia turned to look at him. Really look at him. "Is that what you think I am? Dishonest?" "No." Daniel chose his words carefully. "I think you're careful. I think you've had to be." Sophia was quiet for so long that Daniel thought he had offended her. Then she said so softly he almost missed it. "I wasn't always like this." Daniel waited, letting the silence stretch. "Before what?" he finally asked. "Before I learned that softness gets you hurt." Daniel didn't ask what had hurt her. He could see it in the way she held herself, in the walls she had built, in the way she watched the world with those careful gray eyes. Instead he said, "Softness isn't weakness." Sophia looked at him and something in her expression cracked. "I know, but it's hard to remember sometimes." The transformation in Ava was impossible to ignore. Teachers at her school commented on it in every progress report, how engaged she had become in class, how willing to participate where before she had been content to observe from the margins. Sophia's mother, who visited from Connecticut with increasing frequency, remarked on it during every phone call. Even the usually reserved pediatrician noted during Ava's checkup that she seemed more confident, more communicative than she had been at her last appointment just 3 months prior. "She's made a friend," Sophia explained, knowing that the word friend didn't quite capture what Ethan had become to her daughter. But how could she explain that her 7-year-old had found a kindred spirit, someone who understood her world in a way that Sophia herself never fully could? Sophia watched Ava teach Ethan new signs, watched them develop their own private language within the language, and felt something complicated twist in her chest. Part of it was joy, pure uncomplicated joy at seeing her daughter happy. But part of it, and she hated herself for this, was jealousy. She had tried so hard to bridge the gap between herself and Ava. 3 years of effort, 3 years of tutors and classes and late nights studying grammar she couldn't quite grasp. 3 years of watching her daughter's patient corrections and seeing the flicker of disappointment that crossed her face when Sophia struggled to understand even basic phrases. Why had it been so easy for Daniel? Sophia knew she was being unfair. Daniel had years of practice, a son who had taught him the language from childhood, an ease with communication that came from hard-won experience. But knowing something intellectually didn't stop the small, shameful voice that whispered she would never be enough for Ava. That her daughter needed something Sophia simply couldn't provide. She started pulling back, canceling coffee dates with excuses that grew thinner each time, making up stories about work obligations and travel commitments that didn't actually exist. Daniel noticed, of course he noticed. He noticed everything. But he didn't push, didn't demand explanations. He just kept showing up, kept signing with Ava, kept being patient in a way that made Sophia want to scream. Finally, on an afternoon when Sophia had tried to drop Ava off for a play date without coming inside, Daniel came out to meet her on the sidewalk. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes that made Sophia's defenses rise. "You're avoiding me," he said. Not a question, a statement. "I'm busy." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You're scared." Something about his directness, his refusal to pretend, cracked through Sophia's composure. "Yes," she admitted, the word tasting like failure in her mouth. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of me." The admission came in a rush, words she had been holding back for weeks, spilling out before she could stop them. "Of what this is becoming. Of what it means that my daughter is happier with your son than she's ever been with me. That she has more conversations with you in an hour than she has with me in a week." Daniel stepped closer, close enough that Sophia could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "That's not true." "It is true." Sophia felt tears threaten, and she blinked them back furiously. She didn't cry. She had trained herself not to cry years ago, had learned that tears were weakness, that showing vulnerability was asking to be hurt. "And I don't know what to do with it. So you're going to push us away?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia wanted to say no, wanted to be brave enough to stay, to fight through her fear and keep building whatever this fragile thing was that had grown between their families. But the walls she had spent years constructing were stronger than she was, and the fear of needing someone, of depending on someone, of letting herself be vulnerable enough to be hurt, was overwhelming. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she said finally, "but I need time to figure it out." She walked away before Daniel could respond, before she could see the disappointment in his eyes, before she could change her mind. Behind her she heard Ava's voice, saw her daughter's face in the window of Daniel's apartment, watching her mother leave without explanation, and the guilt was like a physical weight in her chest. For 2 weeks, Sophia avoided Daniel's calls. She sent Ava to play dates with the nanny, made excuses about work emergencies that weren't quite lies but weren't quite truth either. She threw herself into her job with renewed intensity, staying late at the office, taking calls from Chicago at midnight, reviewing reports that could have waited until morning. But the silence in her apartment grew heavier, not lighter. She would catch herself reaching for her phone to text Daniel about some small thing Ava had done, some question about a sign she had finally understood, only to remember that she had been the one to create this distance. She saw the sadness in Ava's eyes when she asked about Ethan, the careful way her daughter had stopped asking if they could visit, and the guilt ate at her. Ava was being too understanding, too patient, and that somehow made it worse. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to be so careful with her mother's feelings, shouldn't have to protect Sophia from her own fears. Then the call from the Chicago office came on a Thursday afternoon, just as Sophia was preparing to leave and pick up Ava from school. There was a crisis, the details of which didn't matter because there was always a crisis, and they needed her on a flight that evening. Sophia stood in her office phone pressed to her ear and felt the familiar weight settle onto her shoulders. She could go. She had gone before many times, leaving Ava with the nanny service that specialized in deaf children. It would be fine. It was always fine. But for the first time she hesitated. Call Daniel. The voice in her head was quiet but insistent. Ask him. The thought was terrifying. Not because she doubted Daniel's ability to care for Ava, she had seen enough to know he would be wonderful, but because asking felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. That she needed him. That they needed him. That the walls she had built were crumbling and she didn't know how to stop them. She called anyway. Daniel answered on the second ring, and when Sophia explained the situation, her voice more uncertain than she had ever heard it, he didn't hesitate. Of course. Bring her over whenever you need. Ava took the news with surprising calm. She had never spent a night away from Sophia, had never been comfortable enough with anyone else to consider it. But when Sophia explained that she would be staying with Daniel and Ethan, Ava's face lit up in a way that made Sophia's chest tighten. Okay, Ava signed simply. Then, with a glance at her mother, she added, It's okay to go. We'll be fine. Sophia knelt down to her daughter's level, cupping Ava's face in her hands. She wanted to say so many things, wanted to apologize for being afraid, for pulling away, for not being the mother Ava deserved. But the words stuck in her throat, so she just pulled Ava into a fierce hug and held on as long as she dared before letting go. The weekend was not what Daniel had expected. He had anticipated awkwardness, the difficulty of caring for a child who wasn't his own, the challenge of adjusting their carefully calibrated routine to accommodate another person. Instead, he found easy companionship. Ava slotted into their life as if she had always been there, trading signs with Ethan over breakfast, helping Daniel make sandwiches for lunch, falling asleep on the couch between both children during a movie marathon on Saturday night. She missed her mother. Daniel could see it in the way she checked Sophia's texts compulsively, in the way she asked him to help her compose video messages that she sent with increasing frequency. But she wasn't falling apart. She was coping the way children do when they feel safe, the way Ethan had learned to cope in those early difficult months after the divorce. Sophia called every night, and Daniel watched Ava's face transform when her mother's image appeared on the screen. They signed to each other for long minutes, conversations that Daniel didn't try to follow, giving them privacy while remaining nearby in case Ava needed him. On Sunday night, when Sophia's face crumpled slightly as she signed that her flight had been delayed another day, Daniel saw Ava reach out and touch the screen as if she could comfort her mother through the glass. It's okay, Ava signed. Daniel's taking care of me. Sophia's eyes found Daniel's over Ava's shoulder, and she mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Daniel nodded, his throat suddenly tight. Later, after Ava was asleep, Sophia called again just for him. She sounded exhausted, wrung out in a way that had nothing to do with the time zone difference. How was she really? Sophia asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question that made Daniel want to reach through the phone and pull her close. Be honest. Honestly, she was great. She missed you, but she was happy. She felt safe. Sophia was quiet for so long that Daniel thought the connection had dropped. Then she said, her voice barely audible, I've never left her with anyone who wasn't paid to watch her. You have now. I know. The words came out as a whisper. That's what terrifies me. I don't know how to do that. Daniel closed his eyes, leaning back against his kitchen counter. Then maybe we figure it out together. There was another long silence. Then Sophia said so quietly he almost missed it. I think I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know what to do with that. The line went dead before Daniel could respond, leaving him standing alone in his kitchen phone still pressed to his ear, heart hammering against his ribs. He stayed there for a long time, staring at the dark screen, trying to process what she had just said, trying to understand what it meant, what happened next. From down the hall he could hear the soft sounds of the children sleeping, Ethan's familiar breathing, and Ava's quieter presence, and he thought about families, and how they formed about walls, and how they crumbled about fear and courage, and the terrifying leap it took to let someone in. He thought about Sophia alone in a hotel room in Chicago, and wondered if she was as scared as he was. Wondered if she knew that he was already too far gone to turn back, that somewhere between that first night at the Christmas party and this moment she had become essential. His phone buzzed with a text, just 3 words that made his eyes burn. I'm sorry, Daniel typed back immediately. Don't be. Then before he could second-guess himself, he added, I'm falling too. He hit send and waited, watching the screen, holding his breath. The response came after what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. Good, because I'm coming home tomorrow, and we need to talk. Daniel smiled despite himself, despite the fear churning in his gut, despite knowing that whatever came next would be complicated and messy and probably difficult. Because Sophia was coming home, and for the first time in 18 months he felt like he might be building towards something instead of just surviving the aftermath of something else. Sophia came home on a Tuesday evening, her flight having been delayed twice more, her patience worn to threads. She went straight to Daniel's apartment, not even stopping at her own place to drop off her luggage, and when Daniel opened the door she could hear Ava and Ethan laughing somewhere inside. For a moment she just stood there, taking in the warmth of the apartment, the smell of something cooking, the sound of her daughter's happiness. It hit her then, standing in that doorway, what she had been afraid of all along. Not that Ava would be unhappy without her, but that Ava would be happy. That her daughter would thrive in a space Sophia hadn't created, surrounded by people Sophia hadn't chosen, and that this thriving would somehow prove that Sophia wasn't enough. But standing there listening to her daughter laugh, Sophia felt something unexpected. Gratitude, pure uncomplicated gratitude for this man who had opened his home without hesitation, who had made Ava feel safe enough to be herself. Daniel stepped aside to let her in, and she walked past him into the living room where Ava was teaching Ethan an elaborate handshake that involved signs for secret words. The room was messier than Sophia's apartment ever was, pillows scattered on the floor, art supplies across the coffee table, a half-finished board game abandoned on the rug. It looked lived in. It looked like home. Ava spotted her mother and launched herself across the room, wrapping her arms around Sophia's waist with a force that nearly knocked her over. You're back, Ava signed, her face buried in Sophia's stomach. I'm back. I missed you so much. Ava looked up, her gray eyes serious. I missed you too, but I had fun. Is that okay? Something in Sophia's chest cracked open, something that had been locked tight for longer than she could remember. Yes, baby. That's more than okay. Later, after Ava had shown Sophia every drawing she had made, every game she had played, every sign she had learned from Ethan, Sophia found Daniel in the kitchen cleaning up from dinner. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him move with easy efficiency, comfortable in his space in a way that Sophia never quite was in her own home. Thank you, she said, for everything. Daniel turned, dish towel in hand. You already said that. I know, but I mean it. I couldn't have... She paused, searching for words. This wouldn't have been possible before. Before what? Before you. Daniel set down the towel and crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Sophia, I need you to know something. I'm not trying to replace you in Ava's life. I know that. Do you... Because you looked terrified when you left. Like you thought we might not be here when you got back." Sophia felt tears threaten again, and this time she let them come, let them spill down her cheeks without trying to hide them. "I've never needed anyone before. Not like this." Daniel reached up to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch gentle. "Is that so terrible?" "Yes." The admission came out raw. "And no, it's just new." They stood there in Daniel's small kitchen, the sounds of the children drifting in from the other room, and Sophia felt the last of her walls beginning to crumble. She had built those walls so carefully, brick by brick, over years, believing they made her strong. But standing here with Daniel's hand against her face, she wondered if maybe strength looked different than she had always thought. Maybe strength was letting someone see you shake and trusting them not to let you fall. The weeks that followed had a different quality than before. Something had shifted between them in Chicago, some line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. They were more careful with each other now, both aware that they were building toward something neither of them quite dared to name. February arrived with the kind of cold that made the city feel smaller, sent people hurrying from building to building with their heads down. Sophia found herself counting the hours until she could leave the office, texting Daniel from meetings to see if he was free that evening, making excuses to stop by his apartment even when there was no logical reason. Her colleagues noticed. She caught the glances exchanged when she left early on a Wednesday, heard the whispered speculation about whether the Ice Queen was finally melting. Let them talk, she thought. Let them wonder. For the first time in her professional life, she didn't care what anyone thought about her personal choices. Ava continued to bloom, growing more confident each week. Her teacher called to say that Ava had volunteered to present her science project to the class, something she had never done before. Dr. Hayes, the child psychologist. Sophia had been taking Ava to since the adoption, remarked that the anxiety she had noted in earlier sessions seemed to have largely resolved. "Whatever you're doing," Dr. Hayes said during their last appointment, "keep doing it." But Sophia could see the other side too, the complications that came with building something real. She noticed the way Daniel's jaw tightened when work called her at dinner, the flash of resignation in his eyes when she had to cancel plans. She saw how Ethan had started asking when Ava was coming over again, before she had even left, how the boy's face fell when Daniel explained that Sophia had meetings. And she noticed things about Daniel himself, things that complicated the picture she had built of him. The way he hovered when Ethan wanted to go to the park with other kids, the questions he asked about who would be there, whether there would be adults who knew sign language, the subtle tightening of his shoulders when Ethan mentioned wanting to try out for the soccer team at school. One evening after the children were asleep, Sophia asked about it. They were on Daniel's fire escape, wrapped in blankets against the March chill, watching the city lights. "You worry about him." Not a question. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "His mother left because she couldn't handle having a deaf child. I'm terrified of what happens if he gets hurt, if kids are cruel, if he decides he doesn't need me anymore." "So you keep him close?" "Too close, probably." Daniel's laugh was hollow. "My therapist says I'm overcompensating, that I need to let him be independent." Sophia thought about the way she had tried to control every aspect of Ava's life, the tutors and specialists and carefully managed schedules, all in service of bridging a gap that only grew wider the harder she pushed. "We all protect our children the wrong ways sometimes." Daniel looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Is that what you think you do? Protect Ava the wrong way?" "I think I've spent 3 years trying to force myself to be something I'm not, instead of just accepting that I can't give her everything she needs. And that has to be okay." The words hung in the cold air between them. Daniel reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You give her more than you know." March bled into April and the city began to thaw. Cherry blossoms appeared in Central Park and the children begged to go see them. They made a day of it, the 4 of them packing sandwiches and spending hours wandering the paths, while Ava and Ethan ran ahead, their hands moving in constant conversation. Sophia watched them with Ethan's mother's eyes, saw the easy affection between the children, the way they had developed their own rhythm. Ava would sign something and Ethan would throw his head back, laughing soundlessly, and Sophia would turn to Daniel with a question in her eyes. "Inside joke," Daniel would explain. Something about a teacher at school. They found a spot under a blooming tree and spread out their blanket. The children ate quickly and then ran off to explore, leaving the adults in companionable silence. Daniel lay back on the blanket, one arm behind his head, and Sophia found herself studying his profile against the pink blossoms overhead. "I've been thinking," she started, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Daniel turned his head to look at her. About what this is. What we're doing." She gestured vaguely between them. "We see each other almost every day. The kids are practically siblings. My mother asked me last week if you were my boyfriend, and I didn't know what to tell her." "What did you tell her?" "I said we were friends." Sophia picked at a thread on the blanket. "She laughed at me." Daniel sat up, and something in his movement made Sophia's pulse quicken. "Do you want to know what I tell people? When Marcus asks why I leave work early on Wednesdays when my mother calls and wants to know why Ethan talks about a girl named Ava constantly," Sophia held her breath. "I tell them you're important, that Ava is important, that I don't have words for what this is yet, but I'm not willing to lose it by trying to define it too soon." The relief that flooded through Sophia was almost dizzying. She had been bracing for pressure, for demands, for the inevitable conversation about what came next and where this was going and whether she was ready to commit to something permanent. But Daniel was giving her time, giving her space to figure out what she wanted without forcing her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not pushing." Daniel's smile was soft. "I'm good at patience. Remember, I learned from a 9-year-old who taught me that some things can't be rushed." They sat there under the cherry blossoms watching their children play, and Sophia felt something settle in her chest. Not resolution exactly, but acceptance. Whatever this was, it didn't need a label yet. It just needed to be. But the universe, Sophia had learned, didn't care about what you needed. It moved according to its own timeline, indifferent to whether you were ready. The call came on a Thursday morning while Sophia was in a budget meeting. Her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize, and normally she would have let it go to voicemail, but something made her step out of the conference room to answer. "Ms. Grant, this is Victoria Ashford. I'm an attorney with Ashford and Associates. I'm calling on behalf of Daniel Reed." Sophia's stomach dropped. "Is Daniel okay? Is Ethan?" "They're both fine, but Mr. Reed asked me to contact you. He's currently meeting with his ex-wife's attorney, and the situation has become complicated." 20 minutes later, Sophia was in a cab heading to Victoria's office in Midtown, her mind racing through possibilities. Daniel had mentioned his ex-wife only in passing, brief references to someone named Rebecca, who had left when Ethan was diagnosed, who had signed away her parental rights without a fight. What could possibly be complicated about that Victoria Ashford's office was all glass and steel, the kind of place that charged by the minute? She met Sophia in the lobby, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. Daniel's in the conference room. His ex-wife showed up this morning with a custody petition. She's remarried, financially stable, and claiming that she's ready to be a mother to Ethan now. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Sophia's feet. She can't do that. She gave him up. She can try, and with a good enough lawyer she might succeed. Victoria's expression was grim. Family court tends to favor mothers, especially ones who can demonstrate changed circumstances. Rebecca's new husband is wealthy, they live in Boston, and she's been taking ASL classes for the past 2 months. Sophia felt rage rising in her throat, hot and acidic. 2 months. Daniel has been signing with Ethan for 6 years. I know. But the court will look at stability, resources, family structure. Rebecca can offer a 2-parent household with significant financial advantages. Daniel is a single father working 60-hour weeks. That's not fair. No, Victoria agreed. It's not. But fair doesn't always matter in family court. Daniel looked hollowed out when Sophia entered the conference room. He was sitting at the large table, staring at the papers in front of him without seeming to see them. When he looked up and saw her, something in his face cracked. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't want to drag you into this." Sophia crossed to him, taking the chair beside him and reaching for his hand. "You didn't drag me anywhere. I'm here because I want to be." She wants him back. Daniel's laugh was bitter. After 6 years of nothing, not a phone call, not a birthday card, nothing. Now she decides she's ready to be a mother. Victoria slid a folder across the table. This is what we're up against. Rebecca's petition. Her financial statements, character references, medical records showing she's been in therapy for postpartum depression and has been cleared by 3 separate psychiatrists. Sophia scanned the documents, her business mind automatically cataloging strengths and weaknesses. Rebecca's case was strong, stronger than she wanted to admit. The financial disparity alone was staggering. Rebecca's new husband, Mark Stevenson, owned a tech company in Boston. They lived in a house in Beacon Hill with a yard and a pool. They could offer Ethan private schools, specialized tutors, every advantage money could buy. But they couldn't offer him what Daniel had given him. They couldn't offer 6 years of learning a language just to communicate with his son. They couldn't offer the kind of patient, devoted love that had helped a scared 3-year-old grow into a confident 9-year-old. "We fight," Sophia said, her voice hard with determination. "We fight this with everything we have." Daniel looked at her, and something in his eyes made her chest ache. "This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is." The words came out with a certainty that surprised even her. "Ethan is Ava's family. You're—" She paused, searching for the right words. "You're mine to protect." The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Victoria worked quickly, building a case that emphasized Daniel's dedication, his consistency, the stability he had provided despite the challenges. She gathered character witnesses. Ethan's teacher, his pediatrician Marcus Chen, who had known Daniel for years, and she asked Sophia to testify. "You're a credible witness," Victoria explained during one of their prep sessions. "Successful, no personal stake in the outcome, well respected in the business community. If you speak to Daniel's character as a father, the judge will listen." Sophia agreed without hesitation, but she could see the conflict in Daniel's face. He didn't want her involved, didn't want to put her in a position where she had to publicly align herself with him. It would raise questions at work, create gossip, potentially complicate her professional life. "I don't care," she told him that night when the children were asleep and they were sitting in his living room surrounded by legal documents. "Let people talk. This is more important." Daniel reached for her hand. "I'm scared." He admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm terrified of losing him." Sophia pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him and feeling him shake against her. She had never seen him like this, had never seen the careful composure crack so completely. It made him more real, somehow more human. She held him while he cried, his tears soaking into her shirt, and she made him a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "We won't let that happen." The children knew something was wrong, even though Daniel tried to shield them. Ethan asked why his mother had called after so many years, why there were lawyers coming to the apartment, why his father looked so tired all the time. Daniel did his best to explain in terms a 9-year-old could understand, signing carefully about how sometimes adults had to work through complicated things in court. "Will I have to go away?" Ethan signed, his small hands trembling. Daniel pulled him close. "Never. You're staying right here with me." But Sophia could see the fear in Ethan's eyes, the way he clung to Daniel a little tighter, the way he asked Ava if she thought his mom would make him leave New York. Ava in turn became quieter, more watchful. She asked Sophia questions about courts and judges and whether Ethan's mom could really take him away. Sophia signed her answers as best she could, her still imperfect ASL, stumbling over the complex concepts. "I don't know, baby, but we're going to fight very hard to keep him here." The day before the preliminary hearing, Sophia received a call from her father. Richard Grant rarely called unless he wanted something, and his timing suggested he had heard about her involvement in Daniel's custody case. "I'm disappointed in you," he said without preamble. Sophia's hand tightened on her phone. "Hello to you too, Dad. Getting involved in some analyst's custody battle, having your name dragged through gossip. This isn't like you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." Richard's sigh crackled through the phone line. "I know you're a smart woman who's built an impressive career, and I know you're about to throw it away for a man who can't possibly understand the world you live in." The words hit harder than Sophia expected, not because she believed them, but because they echoed her own fears from months ago. The fear that Daniel would never fit into her world, that the distance between their lives was too great to bridge. But she had learned something in the past months. She had learned that understanding didn't come from shared experience of wealth or power. It came from seeing someone really seeing them and choosing to meet them where they were. "Daniel understands me better than you ever have," Sophia said quietly. "And if you can't see that, then I feel sorry for you." She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking. She had never spoken to her father that way, had never directly challenged him. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Her phone buzzed with the text from Daniel. "How are you holding up?" She typed back. "Ready for tomorrow. You terrified. But I'm glad you'll be there." Sophia stared at those words for a long time, feeling the weight of what they meant. Tomorrow she would stand in a courtroom and publicly declare herself on Daniel's side. She would testify to his character, his devotion, his fitness as a parent. And in doing so, she would be making a choice that couldn't be unmade, stepping across a line that would change everything. She had spent her whole life being careful, making calculated decisions, weighing risks and benefits before committing to anything. But this didn't feel like a calculation. It felt like the only choice she could possibly make. The courtroom was smaller than Sophia expected, less dramatic than the legal dramas on television. Plain wood paneling, fluorescent lights, uncomfortable chairs in the gallery. Daniel sat at one table with Victoria, while Rebecca and her attorney occupied the other. Sophia studied Daniel's ex-wife from her seat in the gallery, trying to match this polished woman in her expensive suit to the person who had walked away from Ethan. Rebecca was beautiful in a conventional way, blonde and delicate, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in a Beacon Hill mansion. She kept glancing at Daniel with an expression Sophia couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe, or calculation. The hearing began with Rebecca's attorney laying out her case. His client had been young when Ethan was diagnosed, unprepared for the challenges of raising a deaf child. She had made the difficult decision to step back, believing it was in Ethan's best interest. But she had spent the past 6 years working on herself, addressing her mental health, building a stable life. Now she was ready to be the mother Ethan deserved. Sophia's jaw clenched as the attorney painted Rebecca as a victim of circumstance, someone who had sacrificed her own desires for her child's well-being. The narrative conveniently ignored the birthday cards, never sent the phone calls, never made the complete absence that had defined Ethan's childhood. Victoria countered with Daniel's history. 6 years of consistent, devoted parenting. Evidence of Ethan's stability, his happiness, his academic and social success. Character witnesses who testified to Daniel's dedication. Then it was Sophia's turn. She walked to the witness stand with her spine straight and her chin up, the same posture she used when presenting to the Whitmore board. The attorney swore her in, and she met the judge's eyes directly. Victoria started with the basics. "How did you meet Daniel Reed?" "At the Whitmore financial holiday party last December. He approached my daughter, who is deaf, and signed with her. It was the first time I'd seen her smile at that party." "And what is your relationship with Mr. Reed now?" Sophia didn't hesitate. "He's important to me, and to my daughter." "Can you speak to his character as a father?" Sophia took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've watched Daniel with Ethan for 4 months now. I've seen the way he communicates with his son, the patience he shows, the unconditional love. Ethan isn't just cared for, he's understood. He's seen. And that's because Daniel has spent 6 years learning not just to speak Ethan's language, but to think in it, to live in it." Rebecca's attorney stood for cross-examination, his expression skeptical. "Ms. Grant, isn't it true that you and Mr. Reed are romantically involved? We care about each other, yes. So your testimony is biased." "My testimony is honest." Sophia met his eyes. "I came here because I believe Ethan should stay with the parent who has been there for him every single day of his life, the parent who learned an entire language to communicate with him, the parent who deserves him." "And you don't think Ms. Reed deserves a second chance?" "I think," Sophia said carefully, "that children aren't experiments where you get to try again if the first attempt doesn't work out. Ethan has a father who loves him. That should be enough." When Sophia stepped down from the witness stand, she caught Daniel's eyes and saw something in them that made her breath catch. Gratitude, yes, but something more. Something that looked like love in its purest form, stripped of all pretense and protection. The judge called a recess to review the evidence and testimony. Daniel, Sophia, and Victoria waited in a small conference room down the hall, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Daniel paced while Sophia sat motionless, her mind running through every moment of the hearing, analyzing what had gone well and what hadn't. Victoria was less optimistic than Sophia wanted her to be. It could go either way. The judge seemed sympathetic to Daniel, but Rebecca's financial stability is a strong factor. 40 minutes later, they were called back. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a stern mouth, looked down from her bench. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony carefully. This is not an easy decision, and I don't make it lightly." Sophia reached for Daniel's hand under the table, gripping it tightly. "Mr. Reed, you have been a devoted and consistent parent to Ethan. Miss Reed, you've demonstrated genuine remorse and significant personal growth. However, the determining factor in my decision is Ethan's best interest, and stability must be given significant weight." Sophia held her breath. "Primary custody will remain with Daniel Reed. Rebecca Reed will have supervised visitation rights 1 weekend per month to be reassessed in 6 months." The relief that washed through the room was almost tangible. Daniel's shoulders sagged and Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. Rebecca stood abruptly, her face pale, and left the courtroom without looking at anyone. Her attorney gathered his papers and followed. Outside the courthouse, Daniel pulled Sophia into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. She held him, feeling him shake with relief and residual fear and something that felt like joy. "Thank you," he whispered against her neck. "Thank you." When they finally pulled apart, Sophia cupped his face in her hands. "You don't have to thank me. This is where I want to be." They picked up the children from Marcus's apartment, where they had been waiting with careful optimism. When Ethan saw his father's face, he launched himself at Daniel, wrapping his arms around him and signing rapid questions. "She's gone. I get to stay. I don't have to leave." Daniel knelt down to Ethan's level, signing slowly and clearly. "You're staying right here with me. Always." Ava watched from Sophia's side, then signed to her mother. "I'm glad Ethan gets to stay." Sophia signed back, her movements more confident than they had been months ago. "Me too, baby." That night, after the children were asleep, Daniel and Sophia sat on his couch in exhausted silence. The adrenaline of the day was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. But underneath the exhaustion, Sophia felt something else, a sense of rightness, of having done something that mattered. "I talked to my father," she said into the quiet. "He thinks I'm throwing my life away for you." Daniel's hand tightened on hers. "What do you think?" "I think he doesn't understand what a life is supposed to look like." Sophia turned to look at him. "I think I spent 33 years building something that looked impressive from the outside but felt empty inside, and then I met you, and suddenly I could see what I'd been missing." "What was that?" "Connection. Real connection, not just professional networks and strategic relationships. Someone who sees me, not just my resume." Daniel pulled her closer, and she let herself lean into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her cheek. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just breathing together in the quiet of his apartment. "I love you," Daniel said finally, the words barely audible. "I don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between that first night and now you became essential." Sophia's chest tightened, but not with fear, with something warmer, something that felt like coming home. "I love you too, and that terrifies me." "I know, but maybe that's okay." Maybe it was. Maybe love was supposed to be terrifying, supposed to shake the foundations of everything you thought you knew about yourself. Maybe that was how you knew it was real. The weeks following the custody hearing felt different, charged with a new kind of certainty. Sophia found herself staying later at Daniel's apartment, leaving changes of clothes in his closet, keeping a toothbrush in his bathroom. Small intimacies that felt enormous, each one a declaration that she was staying, that this was real. May arrived with unseasonable warmth, and the city seemed to expand in response. People emerged from their winter hibernation, filled the parks and sidewalks, reminded Sophia that the world was larger than conference rooms and courtrooms. She started leaving work at 5 instead of 7, ignoring the raised eyebrows from colleagues who had grown accustomed to her 12-hour days. Richard Grant called twice more each time with thinly veiled disapproval disguised as concern. Sophia let the calls go to voicemail, listened to his messages about throwing away her future and damaging her reputation, and deleted them without responding. She had spent too many years seeking his approval, shaping herself into the daughter he wanted, rather than the woman she was. That version of herself was gone now, replaced by someone who knew what mattered. The children were inseparable. Ethan spent more time at Sophia's condo than at his own apartment, marveling at the space, the view, the kitchen that was bigger than his bedroom. Ava practically lived at Daniel's place, preferring its comfortable chaos to the sterile perfection of her own home. They had begun referring to both places as ours, a casual possessiveness that made Sophia's chest tight with something that felt like hope. One evening in late May, Sophia arrived at Daniel's apartment to find him on the fire escape, staring out at the city with an expression she couldn't quite read. The children were inside doing homework, their heads bent together over Ethan's math assignment. "You're thinking too loud," Sophia said, stepping out to join him. "I can hear it from the hallway." Daniel's smile was brief. "Just wondering what comes next." "Next?" "This." He gestured vaguely between them toward the apartment where their children sat. "We can't keep living in two places forever. It's not practical." Sophia's pulse quickened. They had been dancing around this conversation for weeks, both aware that their current arrangement was temporary, but neither quite ready to name what permanent might look like. "What do you want?" she asked carefully. Daniel turned to face her fully. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want the kids to have actual bedrooms instead of switching between apartments. I want to build something real that lasts." The words settled between them, weighted with implications. Moving in together, combining their lives in a way that couldn't be easily undone. It should have terrified Sophia, should have sent her running back to her carefully controlled existence, but all she felt was a deep, resonant yes. "I've been looking at houses," she admitted, "in Brooklyn. Places with yards, good school districts, space for all of us." Daniel's eyes widened. "You have—" "I wanted to wait until after the custody hearing to bring it up. But yes, I've been thinking about this for weeks." "Show me." They spent the next hour on Sophia's laptop scrolling through listings while the children finished their homework. Daniel pointed out practical concerns. Sophia calculated mortgages and property taxes, and together they began to envision what a shared life might actually look like. "This one," Daniel said, pointing to a brownstone in Park Slope. 3 bedrooms, backyard, walking distance to PS 321. Sophia studied the photos. It was modest compared to her condo, older and smaller, but there was something warm about it, something that felt like it could be theirs. "Let's go see it this weekend." The house showing on Saturday morning felt surreal. Sophia stood in the empty living room of the Park Slope brownstone, watching sunlight stream through windows that needed new curtains, and tried to imagine their lives unfolding in these rooms. Ethan and Ava raced up the stairs to claim bedrooms, their excited signing visible through the doorway. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Janet, pointed out features and potential. Original hardwood floors, updated kitchen, the backyard that needed work but had good bones. Daniel asked practical questions about heating costs and the roof, while Sophia calculated how long her commute would be from here. "The 3rd bedroom is small," Janet said apologetically, "but it could work as an office." Sophia and Daniel exchanged a glance. They had discussed this carefully and hypothetically late one night when neither could sleep. The possibility of more children someday if they wanted, if it made sense. Neither had committed to anything, but the conversation had opened a door. "Or a nursery," Sophia heard herself say. "Eventually." Daniel's hand found hers, squeezing gently. They made an offer that afternoon, sitting in Janet's office while the children got ice cream down the street with Marcus, who had agreed to watch them for the day. The numbers felt astronomical to Daniel. Sophia could see it in the way his jaw tightened, but she had been firm about this. They would both be on the deed, both contribute according to their means, but she would handle the down payment. "I'm not letting you bankrupt yourself for this," she had said when he tried to argue. "We're building this together, but that doesn't mean we have to contribute exactly equal amounts. What matters is that we both want it." The offer was accepted within hours. The seller, an elderly woman moving to assisted living, was charmed by the idea of a family with children moving in of the house being filled with life again. They would close in 6 weeks, giving them time to plan the logistics of combining 2 households into one. That night, lying in Daniel's bed with his arm around her, Sophia felt the magnitude of what they had done settle over her. In 6 weeks she would be living with Daniel Reed. In 6 weeks she would be part of a family in a way she had never quite managed before, even with Ava. The thought should have sent her spiraling into panic, into contingency planning and worst-case scenarios. Instead, she felt peaceful. June arrived with humidity that made the city feel tropical. Sophia spent her lunch hours shopping for furniture, coordinating with Daniel over text about color schemes and storage solutions. They argued good-naturedly about whether they needed a formal dining room or could convert it into a playroom, compromised on bedroom arrangements, made lists of what to keep and what to donate. Ava was ecstatic about the move, signing questions every evening about when they would go, what her new room would look like, whether Ethan would really be right next door. Ethan was more reserved, his excitement tempered by the lingering fear from the custody battle. He asked Daniel repeatedly if this meant they were a real family now, if anyone could take him away from this. "No one's taking you anywhere," Daniel signed, each time patient and steady. "This is permanent." But Sophia saw the worry that lingered in Ethan's eyes, the way he held himself slightly apart even in moments of happiness. The custody battle had shaken something in him, reminded him that the world wasn't always safe, that the people you loved could leave. She found him one evening sitting alone in what would be his new room, the empty space echoing around him. She knocked on the doorframe to get his attention, then signed carefully. "Can I come in?" Ethan nodded, and Sophia sat down next to him on the floor. "You seem sad." Ethan's hands moved slowly, uncertain. "What if you and Dad stop loving each other? What if you leave like my mom did?" Sophia's throat tightened. She had been so focused on her own fears about commitment, about vulnerability, that she hadn't considered how the children might be processing this change. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect forever," she signed, choosing her words with care. "But I can promise that I'm not going anywhere. Your dad and I are building this together because we want to be a family. All of us. What if I do something wrong?" Sophia reached out and pulled him close, feeling his small body tense and then relax against her. "Oh, sweetheart, you could never do anything that would make me leave. You're stuck with me now." Ethan signed against her shoulder, his hands cramped by the angle. "Promise. Promise." The closing was scheduled for the last Friday in June. Sophia took the day off work, something she never did, and met Daniel at the title company's office in Manhattan. They signed endless documents, initialed pages until Sophia's hand cramped, watched their savings accounts drain in real-time transfers that made Daniel wince. But when Janet handed them the keys, when Sophia felt the weight of them in her palm, she understood why people did this. Why they took this enormous leap, bet everything on the belief that love was worth the risk. "Congratulations," Janet said, beaming. "You're homeowners." They drove to Brooklyn in Sophia's car, the children bouncing with excitement in the back seat. When they pulled up in front of the brownstone, when Sophia saw their house, her throat went tight with emotion she hadn't expected. "Ready?" Daniel asked. Sophia looked at him, at this man who had walked into her life at a Christmas party and quietly changed everything, and felt certainty settle in her bones. "Ready." The first night in the new house was chaotic. They had moved the essentials, mattresses and boxes of clothes and kitchen supplies, but the space still felt cavernous and strange. They ordered pizza and ate sitting on the floor of the living room, the children signing excited plans about how to decorate, while the adults exchanged glances that said, "What have we done?" Later, after Ethan and Ava had finally fallen asleep in their new rooms, exhausted from a day of unpacking and exploring, Sophia and Daniel stood in the doorway of the master bedroom and stared at the mattress on the floor. "This is real," Sophia said. "We live together now." Having second thoughts, she turned to face him. "No. Are you—" Daniel pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Not even slightly." They made love that night in their new house on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by unpacked boxes, and it felt like sealing a promise. Afterwards, Sophia lay awake, listening to Daniel breathe beside her, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around them, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Home. This felt like home. July brought a heat wave that made the city unbearable. The brownstones' air conditioning struggled to keep up, and they spent evenings on the back porch, the children running through the sprinkler while Sophia and Daniel drank iced tea and pretended they weren't melting. Sophia's mother came to visit from Connecticut ostensibly to see the new house, but really to assess this man her daughter had moved in with. Daniel was nervous in a way Sophia had never seen him, changing his shirt 3 times before her mother arrived, asking repeatedly if the house looked presentable. "She's going to love you," Sophia assured him, hoping it was true. Margaret Grant was a formidable woman in her 60s, elegant and sharp-eyed, with the same gray gaze as her daughter and granddaughter. She arrived with a casserole and a critical expression, sweeping through the house with observations about crown molding and outdated fixtures that made Daniel's shoulders tighten. But then Ava dragged her grandmother outside to see the garden they were planting, signing with such enthusiasm that Margaret had to ask Sophia to translate, and something in the older woman's face softened. "She's happy," Margaret said, watching Ava show Ethan where they were going to plant tomatoes. "I've never seen her this confident. Daniel's son has been good for her." "Daniel has been good for her." Margaret turned to look at Sophia. "Your father thinks you've lost your mind." "I know." "He's wrong." Margaret's voice was firm. "I've watched you for 3 years try to be the mother Ava needs. You've been so focused on being perfect that you forgot to just be present. But now," she gestured toward where Daniel was helping Ethan dig a hole for a plant, "now you look like you're actually living instead of just managing." Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I need to interrogate this young man about his intentions." Daniel handled Margaret's questions with surprising grace, answering honestly about his finances, his work, his past. He didn't try to embellish or impress, just laid out the facts of his life and let her draw her own conclusions. By the time Margaret left, she was smiling in a way that suggested approval, and she hugged Daniel goodbye with genuine warmth. "You did good," she told Sophia at the door. "He's nothing like I expected." "What did you expect? Someone who wanted your money or your connections? But that man in there just wants you." Margaret squeezed Sophia's hand. "Don't let him go." August meant preparations for the new school year. Both children would be attending PS 321, the public school 3 blocks from their house. Ethan was nervous about starting a new school, about whether the teachers would know sign language, whether the other kids would accept him. Ava, who had attended an expensive private school for deaf children in Manhattan, was anxious about transitioning to a mainstream environment. Sophia and Daniel met with the principal and special education coordinator, advocating for interpreters and accommodations. They toured the building with the children, met teachers, asked careful questions about bullying policies and inclusive practices. The school seemed well prepared, but Sophia saw the worry that lingered in both children's eyes. "What if no one talks to me?" Ava signed one night at dinner. "Then you find the kids who are willing to learn," Daniel signed back. "And you teach them, just like you taught your mom." Sophia's hands had improved dramatically over the past months. She still struggled with complex concepts, still had to ask Daniel to repeat things sometimes, but she could hold conversations now. Real conversations, not just basic exchanges. Last week she had signed an entire bedtime story to Ava without having to ask for help, and the pride on her daughter's face had made her want to cry. The night before the first day of school, Sophia found Ava sitting on her bed staring at her backpack with an expression of pure dread. Scared, Sophia signed. Ava nodded. What if I'm the only deaf kid? What if everyone thinks I'm weird? Sophia sat down beside her daughter, choosing her signs carefully. You are the only deaf kid in your grade, and some kids might think you're different. But different isn't bad. Different is just different. What if I don't make any friends? Then you'll have me and Ethan and Dad. And that's already more than some people have. Ava leaned against Sophia's shoulder. I wish you could come with me. Sophia's chest tightened. Me too, baby, but you're going to be amazing. You're braver than you think. The first day of school was harder than Sophia expected. She stood outside PS 321 with Daniel watching Ethan and Ava walk through the doors together and felt her throat close with worry. They looked so small, so vulnerable, heading into an environment that might not be kind to them. They'll be okay, Daniel said more to himself than to her. I know, but what if they're not? Then we'll handle it. Together. The word together settled something in Sophia's chest. She had spent so much of her life handling things alone, believing that independence was strength and asking for help was weakness. But standing here with Daniel, watching their children disappear into the school building, she understood that together was its own kind of strength. The children came home that afternoon with mixed reports. Ethan had found another boy in his class who knew basic sign language because his grandmother was deaf. Ava's teacher had introduced her to the class and encouraged everyone to learn signs. But there had been difficult moments too, kids who stared at a girl who asked Ava why she talked with her hands like a baby. They worked through it together, the four of them sitting around the dinner table while the children signed their frustrations and fears. Daniel reminded them that change was hard for everyone, that it would get easier. Sophia shared stories from her own childhood about being different, about the sting of not fitting in. They made plans for how to handle difficult situations, practiced responses to rude questions, reminded the children that they had each other. By the end of September, the children had settled into their new routines. Ethan had made two good friends who were learning sign language with enthusiasm. Ava had been invited to a classmate's birthday party, her first social invitation outside of deaf community events. They came home tired but happy most days, their backpacks full of homework and permission slips and the detritus of normal childhood. Sophia's work had noticed her changed priorities. She was no longer the first one in the office or the last to leave. She declined evening events and weekend conferences, citing family commitments with a firmness that surprised even her. There was speculation about whether she was stepping back from her career, whether motherhood had softened her edge. Let them speculate, she thought. Let them wonder. She knew the truth that she was finally living the life she wanted rather than the one she thought she should have. October brought cool weather and the approach of a new holiday season. Sophia found herself thinking about the Christmas party where this had all started, about the lonely child in the corner and the man who had seen her. They had come so far in less than a year, built something that felt solid and real, created a family from pieces that shouldn't have fit together, but somehow did. One evening, Daniel pulled her aside after the children were asleep. His expression was serious in a way that made Sophia's pulse quicken. I need to ask you something, he said. Okay. He took her hands, his palms warm against hers. I know we said we weren't in a rush, that we would let things develop naturally, but I've been thinking. Sophia held her breath. I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to wonder what we are or where this is going. I want to make this permanent. He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, and Sophia felt the world narrow to just this moment, this man, this question. I don't have much to offer you. I can't give you expensive vacations or designer clothes or any of the things you're used to, but I can give you my whole heart. I can give you mornings and evenings and all the ordinary moments in between. I can give you a family that's messy and imperfect and real. He opened the box, revealing a simple silver band with a single small diamond. Will you marry me? Sophia looked down at him, at this man who had taught her daughter to laugh, who had shown her what love looked like when it was patient and steady and true, and felt tears stream down her face. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, yes. Daniel stood and pulled her close, kissing her while she cried against his mouth, and Sophia felt something unlock in her chest. She had spent so many years afraid of this, afraid of needing someone, afraid of the vulnerability that came with love. But standing here in their home wearing Daniel's ring, she understood that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. They told the children the next morning at breakfast. Ava's face lit up with joy, her hands flying in excited questions. When, where, what will I wear? Can I help plan? Ethan was more reserved, his signs careful. Does this mean you're getting married? Like really married? Really married, Daniel confirmed. So we're going to be a real family. Forever, forever. Sophia signed and watched something in Ethan's face relax, some fear he had been carrying finally release. They set the date for December, a small ceremony at City Hall with just close friends and family. Nothing elaborate, nothing formal, just a simple commitment made official. Sophia's mother was thrilled, already planning a small reception at her house in Connecticut. Richard Grant sent a terse email of congratulations that Sophia deleted without responding. November was a blur of wedding planning and work deadlines and the regular chaos of family life. They found rings arranged for a photographer, sent invitations to the handful of people they wanted there. Marcus would be Daniel's best man. Victoria would stand up for Sophia, and the children would be part of the ceremony, signing their own promises to be a family. The week before the wedding, Sophia was working late when her assistant knocked on her office door. "There's a woman here to see you. She says her name is Rebecca Reed." Sophia's blood went cold. "Send her in." Rebecca looked different than she had in the courtroom, smaller, somehow less polished. She stood in the doorway of Sophia's office, wringing her hands, and Sophia felt a surge of protective rage. "What do you want? I heard you're marrying Daniel." Rebecca's voice was quiet. "I wanted to apologize." "For what? Abandoning your son, or trying to take him back?" Rebecca flinched. "Both. All of it. I was wrong, and I hurt people I should have protected. I can't fix what I did, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. What Daniel has built with Ethan, what you've built together." Sophia studied her, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda, but all she saw was genuine regret. "Ethan is thriving," Sophia said finally. "He has a father who loves him and a home where he's safe. If you want to be part of his life, you do it on our terms. Supervised visits when we allow them, no surprises, no trying to upend his stability." "I understand. I just want him to know that I'm sorry, that I'm trying to be better." "Then prove it. Show up consistently. Be the person he can count on, not the person who disappears when things get hard." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will. Thank you for taking care of him, for being what I couldn't be." After she left, Sophia sat at her desk for a long time, processing the encounter. She didn't trust. Rebecca might never trust her, but there had been something genuine in her apology. Time would tell if she meant it. The wedding day arrived with crystalline winter sunshine. Sophia stood in the bathroom of the City Hall, getting ready room, adjusting her simple cream dress, and felt remarkably calm. Ava was beside her, wearing blue velvet and clutching a small bouquet, signing excited observations about everything. "You look pretty, Mom." "Thank you, baby." "You look beautiful." "Are you nervous?" Sophia considered the question. A year ago she would have been terrified, would have been calculating exit strategies and contingency plans. But now, thinking about Daniel waiting for her, about the life they were building, she felt only certainty. Not even a little bit. The ceremony was brief and perfect. Daniel's eyes were bright when Sophia walked in, and her hand was steady when she took his. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to choose each other every day, to build a life that honored both their strengths and weaknesses, to create a home where love was louder than fear. Then Ethan and Ava stepped forward, and Daniel and Sophia knelt down to their level. Together the four of them signed promises to each other. To be patient, to be kind, to be a family in all the ways that mattered. When the officiant pronounced them married, when Daniel kissed her in front of their small gathering of loved ones, Sophia felt something shift in the universe. This was permanent now. This was real. The reception at Margaret's house was small and warm, filled with people who genuinely cared about them. Marcus gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Victoria spoke about watching Sophia discover what mattered. The children performed a dance they had choreographed, their hands moving in synchronized signs that told the story of how their family had formed. Late in the evening, Sophia found herself standing by the window watching Ava and Ethan play in the snow that had started falling. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. Sophia leaned back against him, feeling his warmth, his solidity. "Happier than I knew I could be. No regrets." She turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "Not even one." They drove back to Brooklyn that night, the children asleep in the back seat, the city glittering with Christmas lights. When they pulled up in front of their house, Sophia looked at the windows glowing warm in the darkness and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. A year ago she had been standing in a ballroom watching her daughter sit alone, wondering if things would ever get easier. Now Ava was thriving, confident and happy and loved. Now Sophia had a partner who saw her a family that was messy and real and hers. She thought about all the years she had spent building walls, protecting herself, choosing independence over connection because independence felt safer. She thought about the woman she had been so focused on control that she had forgotten how to live. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone braver, someone willing to risk everything for the chance at something real. Daniel carried Ethan inside while Sophia woke Ava gently. The children stumbled up to their rooms, still half asleep, and Sophia tucked them in with kisses and signed, "I love yous." When she came back downstairs, Daniel was waiting in their bedroom, and they made love as husband and wife for the first time, slow and tender and full of promise. Later, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion, Sophia slipped out of bed and went to stand at the window. The backyard was covered in fresh snow, pristine and beautiful in the moonlight. She thought about spring, about the garden they would plant, about mornings and evenings, and all the ordinary moments that would fill their lives. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping her in a blanket, and they stood together watching the snow fall. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That night at the Christmas party, when you signed hello to Ava. I almost didn't go, you know. I almost stayed home." "I'm glad you didn't." "Me too." They stood there in the quiet, and Sophia thought about beginnings and endings, about the ways life could surprise you if you were brave enough to let it. She had spent so long trying to control everything, to manage every outcome, to protect herself from pain. But control had never made her happy. It had only made her safe. And safety, she had learned, was just another word for lonely. From down the hall a light flicked on. Ava appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, with Ethan a shadow behind her. "Can't sleep," Ava signed. "Can we stay with you?" Sophia looked at Daniel, and they both smiled. They opened their arms, and the children tumbled into the room, into the bed, into the space they had created for this family. All four of them curled together under blankets, warm and safe, and together. In the morning, Sophia would wake up and make breakfast for her family. She would help the children with their homework and go to work and come home to chaos and laughter. She would sign with her daughter and kiss her husband and live the messy, imperfect life they had built together. But for now, in the quiet before dawn, she lay surrounded by the people she loved and felt something she had searched for her whole life without knowing what she was looking for. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, not the illusion of control, but the deep peace that came from being exactly where you belonged with exactly the right people. Sign language had brought them together, but love, patient and persistent and brave, had made them whole.